Hello, lovelies, and welcome back to this little adjunct to the Fluffenhammmer in which I take a look at some of my favourite creatures and beasties from the Age of Sigmar and the Warhammer 40,000 universes. There's so much going on at the moment. I could do so much. I mean, I'm very tempted, actually, to take a look at some of the more Slaaneshi stuff, given what's going on in Age of Sigmar with Slaanesh at the moment. It's so bloody exciting. As those of you who listen to the main podcast will know, I'm on cloud 9 or cloud 6 as it were, given that's the sacred number of Slaanesh. We've been aching for mortals in the Slaaneshi forces for so long, something to rival what the Blades of Khorne have got, you know, where you've got the Bloodbound, you've got the Blood Reavers, you've got all those really wonderful, weird, twisted, semi-mortal, semi-demonic units, which are really cool. The priests and all of that, the slaughter priests and that kind of thing. And now we're getting it. Oh my god, as I discussed with Andy and Adam on the main show, I am so excited by this. Those miniatures, I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm normally a 40k guy by nature. You know, I like the sort of dark dystopianism of the 40k universe. I like the expansiveness of it, but I'm telling you those mortals are just dragging me in. They're so good. I love the influences, the aesthetic and cultural touchstones that they've got going on. I think they are phenomenally beautiful in a very Slaaneshi way. So distinct from all of the other mortal units you can get for the other Chaos powers, which I love, by the way. I love the mortals in the Chaos. I like mortal Chaos followers more than I like demonic Chaos followers. The reason I love the demons, don't get me wrong, the demons are great in terms of what they are. The way that they are sort of adjuncts of their patron power. Each demon is a little slice or portion of the Chaos God that's sort of taken away and fashioned and formed by the Chaos God itself so that it has a semblance of autonomy. But they are never really autonomous. A Chaos God can just wink a demon out. Even the greater demons, even the more powerful ones, they can just wink them out of existence if they want to and just draw their energy back into themselves. That doesn't stop them, though. I'm telling you, with some of the Chaos powers, because they are by nature contradictory, because they are by nature perverse entities, that doesn't stop some of the bigger, more independent demons from making power grabs, even against the Chaos God. I mean, you've got examples of that in the likes of Ka'Bandha, for example, the greater demon of Khorne that actually hit Khorne with one of his axes in a peak of rage. I mean, can you imagine the balls on that guy? Not Ka'Bandha, it's Skarbrand, isn't it? Ka'Bandha's the big bloodthirster. Ka'Bandha is the big bloodthirster that fought Sanguinius at the gates of Terror during the Horus Heresy. No, I mean Skarbrand. Skarbrand actually hit Khorne. I mean, that is the most Khornate thing you could possibly do, because of course Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows. So like treachery and betrayal are innately part of Khorne's nature, you know. His followers often sacrifice one another and themselves in order to appease Khorne. Like if there's no foe to fight, Khorne Berserkers, for example, not only have they been known to turn on one another, they've been known to turn on themselves in sheer fury and frustration. If there are no skulls to take, if there's no blood to give, they've been known to hack off their own heads in homage to Khorne. It has been known. You've got the likes of Khan the Betrayer, of course, but who by his very nature is the highest priest of Khorne you could possibly imagine, because he gets it. He knows that Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows. So he turns on his allies as much as he turns on his enemies. He doesn't care. Khornate followers at their purest do not. They don't care. So for Ka'Bandha, I keep saying Ka'Bandha, Skarbrand epitomizes that. He's the very manifestation of that particular perversity. The fact that Khorne's followers turn on themselves and one another as readily as they turn on anyone else. And he hit Khorne with his axe at one point, and Khorne was not happy, as you can imagine. That's why Skarbrand is like the outcast bloodthirster. He's one of the most powerful. He's one of the most powerful bloodthirsters out there, but he is condemned to wander mindless and in constant agony, because Khorne basically picked him up and chucked him. He was so annoyed by the fact that Skarbrand hit him, that he picked him up and chucked him, and he basically became like a blazing comet that flew across the Chaos Wastes, that flew through the mortal realms, throughout the heavens of the worlds of the 41st millennium, and eventually landed in a physical shape, a sort of ragged, broken, wounded, bloodthirster shape. And that's what he is. He's like this incarnation of absolutely mindless, thoughtless, heedless rage that you cannot direct, that you cannot, there's not even any consciousness in Skarbrand anymore. He is just an engine of rage. And I love that. I think that's really cool. You've got Tzeentch demons. Oh no, Tzeentch, of course. Tzeentch's demons are endlessly plotting against one another and double-crossing one another. And some of the greater demons even plot to try and overthrow Tzeentch, because that's their nature. That is the nature of Tzeentch. He is endlessly scheming. He is the lord of all change. So he actually admires that. He admires that in his followers and cultivates it because it amuses him. Of course, there's not much they can actually do. If any of them ever came close to even like posing the merest threat to his supremacy, he could just like click his fingers and they'd be gone. But he doesn't, he doesn't need to. He just lets them get on with it. Amongst the Slaaneshi forces, you've got those greater demons and demon princes that are amongst the pretender cohorts, who, when Slaanesh was missing, he's not anymore. If you've read Morathai, Broken Realms Morathai, he's back! Slaanesh is back in the mortal realms, and boy, is it going to be a fun time when the Hedonites get moving again. The greater demons and the demon princes of the Hedonites, they tried to take his throne. They fancied themselves like the next incarnation of Slaanesh, if you like, or rather the entity that could potentially usurp their creator. I mean, again, the balls on these guys. Of course, there's no way they'd ever get even close. Even in his imprisoned, weakened state, Slaanesh was more than powerful enough to just wink them out of existence. But he didn't, because again, it's part of the god's nature. That degree of narcissism, that degree of ego and self-adoration and adulation, that is part of Slaanesh's nature. And so, of course, by its nature, it empowers him. So, whatever, he doesn't mind. The only ones that don't seem to have that quality are the Nurgle demons. Again, Nurgle's a really unusual one, because Nurgle is so affectionate to his followers, and his followers are so adoring of Nurgle, particularly his demons. His demons, the greater demons of Nurgle, which are essentially just manifestations of Nurgle in the material universe, in every way. They are little copies of Nurgle. They've got his nature, they've got his appearance, they've got his aspects and his qualities, little derivations of his powers, They adore him. They absolutely adore him. I don't think there could ever be a situation where maybe a demon prince, you could potentially have a demon prince of Nurgle that maybe is born of resentment, because that is part of Nurgle's nature. He's a god of psychological disease as much as physical disease, and his followers are often born out of resentment, denialism, despair, depression, fear, anxiety, as much as they are anything else. So you could potentially have like a mortal who was consumed by such incredible resentment for the circumstances that that were foisted upon them, that they even resent their creator into their immortality. That's entirely possible. You could actually weave a kind of interesting narrative around that. But for the greater demons, the Great Unclean ones, no, I don't think there's a possibility that any of them could even conceive of trying to usurp Nurgle or go against his wishes. They are so much enthralled to him. They adore him, and they do everything in their power to try to please him, because he's their granddad, he's their grandsire, he's the big jolly god of love and life and affection to these guys. They absolutely adore him. As for the Plaguebearers, they don't have the autonomy. They're unlike, say, the Demonets of Slaanesh, who have incredible autonomy for lesser demons. The Plaguebearers don't really. They're interesting. I love the Plaguebearers. I absolutely love the Plaguebearers as demons, because they have very interesting... Not only do they have interesting forms and aspects, but they also have interesting origins. Unlike most demons, they're not created from little portions of the god. They're actually originally mortals who suffered from Nurgle's rot, a demonic disease which is the epitome of all of Nurgle's creations, which the god inflicts upon mortals, and which it doesn't just rot. Its symptoms are those of every disease imaginable. Every disease ever conceived is in Nurgle's rot. And not only do the mortals suffer all of those symptoms, they also suffer metaphysical and spiritual symptoms as well. Their soul rots on the vine. So they suffer and they suffer and they suffer and they suffer with no hope of reprieve, not even hope of death. The disease will not let them die. It just makes them suffer until they have no choice but to give themselves to Nurgle, to surrender to Nurgle. And when they do that, their souls leach into the garden of Nurgle, where they are reborn. They swell on the vines of these hideous diseased trees in the garden of Nurgle, and they fall and eventually become newborn Plaguebearers. So they actually have mortal origins, the Plaguebearers, which is kind of interesting. They're also interesting in terms of their aspects. They are born of suffering, so they are amongst the followers of Nurgle who represent the despair rather than the jollity. Plaguebearers tend to be grumpy and resentful of their lots. They get on with it, they do what they're supposed to do, and they do as they're told, but they're grumpy about it. You know, they moan. And that's their lot. They're called the Tallymen of Nurgle, because their business, their job, their entire purpose is to count everything. It's to number all of the myriad infections, diseases, followers, sufferers, their symptoms, everything. They even count things like the molecules of spores in the air, or the drips of pus from lesions, that kind of thing. Their task is impossible. It's absolutely impossible, and they know it's impossible, but they get on with it anyway. Their entire aspect is that they are attempting to impose order and meaning on an innately orderless and meaningless reality. And that is the core of the psychology of where Nurgle's followers come from. It's really cool, isn't it? I love that about Plaguebearers. They're so interesting. And then, of course, you've got the other ones. You've got the ones that distinguish themselves amongst the Plaguebearers. Apparently they tend to be the ones that survive Nurgle's rot for longer than others. They resist for longer. They give birth to a much more potent and individual Plaguebearer in the Garden of Nurgle that has some semblance of its original personality, some semblance of who it used to be. That's really, really cool. I love that stuff so much. You've got the distinct heralds of Nurgle as well, like the fantastically named Sloppity Bilepiper. The Sloppity Bilepiper is It's a Plaguebearer of Nurgle that's been inflicted with a particular disease, and what this disease does is that it inverts the Plaguebearer's natural personality. So instead of being incredibly morose and dour, they suddenly become ecstatic. They become manically deranged and happy, and they sing and they dance and they caper around, and they try to rouse the other Plaguebearers and make them happy in their lots. Oh, isn't everything wonderful? And they play these hideous organic instruments that are actually made from the guts and the intestines of their predecessors. It's a really funny, cool concept. I love that so much. I've got to say, I love the demons of all the Chaos Gods for the most part. They've all got really interesting aspects to them, and interesting sort of qualities that are as much metaphorical as they are anatomical, or parts of their natures. You can look at demons and how they operate and what their natures are, and you can discern what aspects of mortal drives and psyches go into their creation. Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about them. So you can look at things like, for example, you can look at the Great Unclean one, and you can see basically the Great Unclean one it's an abusive parent. It's an abusive parent. It's a narcissistic parent. It's a parent that presumes to love its followers. It assumes that what it does is always loving and always right and always correct. But it's also the parent that wants to keep its children in a very particular set of parameters and circumstances. It wants them to be this way and this way only, and woe betide them if they ever try to transgress beyond it. It only loves them because they conform to particular aspects and particular sets of circumstances, yeah? were a Plaguebearer maybe to remember its mortal origins, what it was, who it was in life, and try to sort of claw its way out of its own condition or to change its own circumstances, I imagine a Great Unclean one would be very unhappy about that. They'd feel betrayed, as abusive parents often affect. It would be, oh, I've done everything for you, you ungrateful child. It would be that, the narcissistic parent thing. That's so cool, isn't it? That is such a cool thing. The Demons of Slaanesh are probably my favourites. I love the Demons of Nurgle very much. I think everybody does, because aesthetically they're so distinct, they're so interesting. The models are brilliant for the most part. One of my absolute favourite models of recent years has got to be Horticulus Slimex, the Plaguebearer gardener who rides a big snail. He is so much fun. He actually fights with a pair of gardening shears, and apparently he just wanders around Nurgle's gardens, endlessly tending to them, grumbling about it, as there's something very working class about the Plaguebearers that I absolutely bloody love. He basically grumbles about his lot all the time, Horticulus Slimex. He just grumbles but gets on with the work, I love him. I love him so much, but my favourites are the Demons of Slaanesh. I mean, they're always going to be. They represent so much of not just what I aesthetically appreciate, but what I love in humanity. There's something very ambiguous about the Demons of Slaanesh, because they are, on the one hand, they are, as well as being inspirers of obsession and narcissism and ego and self-destructive elements like that, they are also muses. So you've got things like the Infernal Rapturesses, for example, who their whole shtick is that they whisper to inspired mortals, and they fan the flames of their inspirations to the point whereby they become obsessed about them to the nth degree, whereby they cannot do anything else, they cannot conceive of anything else. They become wrecks, basically. They neglect bathing, they neglect themselves, they neglect their stations, they neglect their health, they don't eat. All they do is work on the piece of music, the piece of art, the sculpture, whatever it is, to the point whereby they allow it to consume themselves, until the point whereby they actually start using their own bodies as parts of it, and that's where the Infernal Rapturess has absolutely got them. That's when their souls become, and their bodies actually become, the property of the Infernal Rapturess. If you look at the model, it's got this harp called a heartstring lyre, and the heartstring lyre is made out of one of these wretches, one of these mortals that the Infernal Rapturess has inspired, and it's very Cenobitic, it's very Clive Barker. The sort of flayed and scarred and wounded mortal has got the frame of a harp rammed into their arms and back, and portions of their body and their soul has been sort of drawn out to make the strings, and it's a weapon. It's essentially a weapon as well as an instrument. I love that. I love that so much. I like how human the Demons of Slaanesh are. As I said earlier, the Demonets of Slaanesh. And by the way, that title is a misnomer, but just because they're called Demonet doesn't mean that they're female. They're not. Just like all of Slaanesh's demons, they actually defy those parameters. They are neither one thing nor the other at all. They can appear as either male or female, depending on the proclivities of those they appear to, and they can physically shift between the two as well, so they can be one thing or another. But they are also both and neither. They are these sublimely androgyne entities that are just epitomes of both beauty and disturbing hideousness at the same time. That I just love that, and I love the fact that they have such autonomy. The Demonets of Slaanesh are some of the most interesting demons because they're complex, they're intelligent, and they spend a lot more time in the mortal realms and mortal universes than almost any of the other demons do. All demons whisper to mortals, even the Demons of Khorne do that. They whisper into the minds of murderers and people who have anger issues and military generals and soldiers and that kind of thing. But the Demonets of Slaanesh, it is their principal purpose. In fact, they do more of that than they actually appear on the battlefield, because that's more of Slaanesh's arena. They whisper secretly into the dreams of mortals when they're in throes of love or lust or desire or obsession or inspiration. That's where they get you. That's where they snare you. And so they have much more psychological complexity than most other demons do. They are closer to humanity the most demons. They know how to pull the strings. They know exactly what to say or how to say it in order to influence the state of a mortal's mind just to that point, and then to tip it over into obsession, into vanity, into narcissism, into ego. That's what they do, and I kind of love that. There is something muse-like, there's something siren-like, but there's also something very Mephistophelian about them. They are the great temptators. They whisper into the ears, and it's always going to be down the darkest and most obsessive and sadistic path that they take them. It doesn't matter what it starts out as, whether it's like something they often, what the mortals who attract demonets often start out doing something that seems to be benign or even seems to be laudable, something beautiful, like creating a great work of art or philosophy or something like that, or even a great work of charity. But the Demonets have this very peculiar capacity to twist and manipulate and pervert, which is exactly what they do, because that's what they see beauty in, and that's what they take pleasure in. And then, of course, once those souls are entirely corrupted, they wing their ways back to the palace of Slaanesh, or to the circles of Slaanesh, where they give those secrets to the keepers of secrets, which are the greater demons of Slaanesh, who then use them for their own nefarious ends. It's really cool. But I do love the mortal followers of Slaanesh more. I love the mortal followers of all the Chaos Gods more, because I find the complexity of psychology that goes into falling to one or more of the Chaos powers to be fascinating. What draws people into... I mean, Slaanesh is the easiest one, without a shadow of a doubt. If you read all of the old fluff about Slaanesh, the old background, particularly in the Liber Chaotica, it points out that Slaanesh cults are the most pervasive of any of the Chaos powers. They are everywhere, absolutely everywhere, often masquerading as legitimate enterprises or gatherings. They're often like artistic circles or philosophical circles, or they are little sort of cults of the nobility that gather together to feast on particular kinds of food, or they are theatrical circles, things like that. They can be, not only do those act as masks for Slaanesh cults, very often the people who are in them don't even realise that they are Slaanesh cults until it's too late, until it's gone too far. They can start with very noble or laudable ideals, but which then are slowly corrupted as time goes on, and that I find fascinating. Slaanesh is very easy to fall to, because there are so many paths. The thing with Slaanesh, his whole thing is that obsession. His whole thing is extremity. There's no one particular condition or emotion or human experience that feeds Slaanesh. They all do. Everything from violence to lovemaking, from inspiration to even things like despair can fuel Slaanesh if they're obsessed over to a certain degree, if they are fetishized to a certain degree. Any extremity of emotion or thought or action can feed Slaanesh, and in that regard, Slaanesh has the potential to overshadow the other Chaos powers, and they know this, they are aware of this, because they are all entities of extremes and obsessions. Even their obsessions and extremes empower Slaanesh to a certain degree, and they know that, and they do not like it. They kind of resent it. It's almost like Slaanesh trespasses on all of their territories to a certain degree, and I love that. And that seems to be the way they're going with Slaanesh in terms of his representation. If you look at the new stuff that's coming out, you've got that wonderful new centerpiece miniature, the avatar of Slaanesh that represents greed, that represents conspicuous consumption. That is a fabulous way to take Slaanesh into the realms of his aspects. The circles of Slaanesh in his realm are organized around particular sins, particular obsessions, and they're all very complex. They're all very particular human drives, so there's no reason why you shouldn't have demons of Slaanesh or followers of Slaanesh that emphasize them above and beyond anything else, You can have Slaaneshi musicians, you can have Slaaneshi painters, you can have Slaaneshi sculptors, you can have Slaanesh anything, technically, which is something I absolutely love about the god. Slaanesh is one of the most complex of the Chaos powers, and there's the fact that they're taking them down that route with both the background and the miniatures makes me very, very, very bloody happy, I've got to say. I can't wait to see the book. I am so on board with. I cannot wait to see the new Hedonites book, and I can't wait to see what else is coming down the line. I really can't. So thank you for listening to that slightly rambling episode, my loves. When we come back, maybe we'll have another episode of Def Fluffenhammmer for you. Until then, my loves, bye-bye.